Oh, everybody made it. I'm so excited. Beryl, you made this happen.
Thank you, all of you, for joining. Dear Professor Paul Ehrlich, what a pleasure this is. I'm so much excited. Thank you so much for making your time joining us.
Glad to do it. Good cause, hopeless cause, but what the hell?
Dear Guy, dear Pauline, dear Kevin and William, all of you, thank you so much. Thank you. I'm so much excited. I'm feeling so much blessed.
As Edward Abbey wrote, when the situation is hopeless, there's nothing to worry about.
Well, I have some news to share. Today is the last final exam I gave at this university because, as Beryl and I both know, I shall be soon in her neck of the woods.
But this is also our last remote interview with William.
That's great. When do you fly out there?
48 hours.
Oh my gosh, you guys must be so excited.
Where are you going? I'm lost on this.
I'm going to join my darling Beryl, who's in the Netherlands.
Yeah, you want to get a little closer to the world's last war.
Yes, last war, and also on the sea level, expecting everything. What goes wrong first?
Where are you in the Netherlands?
I used to live in the West. My house used to be under 8 meters sea level. I moved to east part of the country. I'm now in German border. I moved 4 years ago. I moved this side.
Well, I wouldn't care where she is. I would follow.
Yeah.
And today I'm wearing this butterfly because I know that you started your research with butterflies.
Oh yeah.
Long time ago. But we shall start. I read your 2 books. And of course, everybody knows the population bomb, very famous one. And also one with dear Carl Sagan about
the cold
nuclear.
in the dark, nuclear winter.
And I read a lot of reviews also about the book. People say that it's the only book written by 2 very precious scientists of the planet. Very easy to understand what would happen to our biosphere when a nuclear war happens. But they didn't like hearing it. It was the best book to read, but not the happiest book. They didn't like what they read about it. So we are in critical times, and you wrote that book long time ago. Did you expect anything to happen these days when you're writing that book? Because of the situation that we are in right now.
After all, the population bomb was written in 1968. There were 3.5 billion people on the planet. By, in a sense, a coincidence because of our timing now, that's the maximum number of people that the best economist on the planet thinks might be sustainably maintained at roughly a little less than a Mexican standard of living. That's Sir Partha Dasgupta, who just did a huge study of the economics of biodiversity for the British government. And he has published many times on population issues. And his rough estimate is 3.5 billion might be sustained. When I looked at that with Anne and Gretchen Daly now 30 years ago, we came up with somewhat more fewer, like a 1.5 billion, but it depends, among other things, on what standard of living you want to calculate it at. If it's on a U.S. standard of living, of course, you can hardly support anybody more, and certainly the population of the United States today would be plenty. But the basic point is we're approaching 8 billion. There's not the slightest question that we should be working very hard to humanely reduce the number of people. while we still have a planet that will support us. And there's not the slightest sign of that, which leads to my vast optimism.
Right.
Well, probably even if the population reduced right now magically in a one day, we wouldn't be able to save the planet in current conditions because of the overshoot and the accumulated energy within the oceans.
Oh, the amount of damage is already vast.
Wouldn't you agree that we passed all the tipping points?
Sorry that we're.
Wouldn't you agree that we already overshooted all the tipping points?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, all you have to do is realize, for example, that 96% roughly of the mammalian biomass on the planet is human beings and cows and sheep, and that the other 4% is the wildlife, much of which is involved in supporting us, but doing a less and less desirable job. The loss of biodiversity, of course, is tightly tied in two directions to the climate disaster. On one hand, the loss of biodiversity is leading to more greenhouse gases and more climate change. And then, if you, for example, ever gardened or kept tropical fish, you know that organisms are totally tied in to living in the proper temperature ranges. We're changing them rapidly. So while biodiversity loss is helping to make the climate change more rapid, the more rapid climate change is exacerbating the biodiversity loss. And of course, there are other existential threats, not the least of which is the threat of nuclear war, which is worse now probably than it has been. At least my close colleague and friend, Bill Perry, who's worked on this issues ever since he was the Secretary of Defense of the United States, thinks, as do my other colleagues who are experts in this area, the danger of a large-scale nuclear war now is worse than it was at any time during the Cold War. And of course, a large-scale nuclear war is the end of everything.
Yeah.
And very cheery.
I was born in the late 60s, and I recall, I think so many people were inspired by Carl Sagan, and I remember being, just terribly depressed already as a teenager because I lived in Germany. My dad was military, and about the Cold War situation. And, nowadays, like you were saying too, what I understand about the post-Cold War strategy, that I think of the work of Dr. Peter Vincent Pry, who has argued quite, convincingly that Russia and China, for instance, and of course, not to mention the United States, I mean, we've long since passed this mutual assured destruction paradigm. We are treating the use of tactical nuclear weapons as being, something winnable. And
that's insane.
It is.
Well, also, I don't know, I heard yesterday that there's more problems with the nuclear power plant that is in the Ukraine, but close to Russia. And again, we could have another Chernobyl. That's small scale compared to a full nuclear war, but bad enough. Unfortunately, Mr. Putin's got crazy ideas about restoring Tsarist glory to Russia. But of course, our government has crazy ideas too. Even somebody, and I met Joe Biden and talked to him once for quite a long time. He's a very bright guy, but he still is forced to say that growth is what's necessary when growth is the disease. And the Chinese want to grow, the Russians want to grow, we want to grow. At a time when we desperately need international cooperation, the EU's breaking up. What can I tell you? And of course, democracy's about gone here, I'm afraid. Fortunately, I'm not going to have to fool with this much longer.
Unfortunately, I suspect none of us will have to deal with this much longer.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we were young when we started talking about this.
I watched your Tonight Show interview. It was on YouTube. It was a long time ago when 1980, I think, on Tonight Show you appeared. And that time you mentioned the nuclear war possibility, how it would terribly make impact losing the habitat. But you also added that you do not expect Russians to just suddenly shoot all the planet. But that was that time. Do you still think so? Do you think Russians will not do that, or any other country?
Well, of course, nobody, at least I can, and I don't think anybody else can see inside Putin's mind or that of our war preparers. But the possibility of, I'm not sure I got your question exactly, but the answer to a general question is first of all, you don't have to plan a large-scale nuclear war. We've come within inches of it something like 7 times already, and generally been saved by the sensible actions of single individuals not at the top of the command. The most cited example is the Russian submariner who had the option of launching a nuclear torpedo at an American carrier during the Cuban Missile Crisis and decided not to. There was the American, I don't remember what his rank was, who realized that the wrong cassette had been loaded into a machine that produced on all of our ready TV screens what appeared to be an attempted attack on us full scale by the Russians when it was a training video. And that somebody saw and stopped. And there are lots of other examples. I think the most recent was a Norwegian sounding rocket that was misinterpreted as an attack, but somebody said, no, don't launch in response in Russia. So the chance of an accidental nuclear war still remain extremely high. We have too many weapons that are still ready to go on basically hair trigger alert. But if Putin decides to get more of the Ukraine by using a tactical nuclear weapon, the chances of escalation in most people's estimation are close to 100%. So a start with a tactical nuclear weapon almost certainly would lead to a large-scale nuclear war, which we know would lead to an end of civilization and perhaps even an end to Homo sapiens. That's more tricky. No doubt, no question at all that even a nuclear war between India and Pakistan, if it used all their weapons, would be enough to destroy civilization. You don't have to have Russia and the United States do it.
What do you
The
think?
Russian military,
Yeah.
Sorry.
the Russian military commander who saved us by not launching his missiles, he risked getting court-martialed and shot for saving us that day. And we've been on that cusp at least a half a dozen times that I know of.
Yeah, that's about somewhere around 6 to 8 times when a tiny, an unexpected intervention, usually by a single person, saved us from having the end of civilization. Of course, remember what Gandhi said when he was asked, what do you think of Western civilization? He said, I thought it would be a good idea.
Brilliant.
Well, and that's those single soldiers came through a society that was ethical, moral, and I'm saying more ethical and more moral than it is now, and at a higher level of education.
Yeah.
And right now, the US, I don't know if you've heard about this, I'm sure you have, they've decided to allow high school dropouts to join the military.
Oh, I mean, I was in general thought Obama was a good choice and a good president, but he allowed what has continued the modernization, so-called modernization of the nuclear triad, which is read by Russia as an attempt to put us in a position for a first strike attack. And that goes on right now. Now, you have to say there's some good things about it. It's giving many hundreds of millions or billions of dollars to people who are already rich, members of Murder Incorporated. You know, our biggest industry is Murder Incorporated, the gun manufacturers who give us automatic weapons so that teenagers can kill dozens of people at one time, and the money that goes into the nuclear weapons to increase the chances of the end of civilization. So Murder Incorporated is getting lots of money, and I personally hope they'll get a chance to spend it, but I don't think we'll last that long.
Well, the U.S. is the only country that's ever dropped nuclear weapons on innocent civilians. So the chances of us doing that again are higher than anyone else doing it.
But we're the right people to run the planet, don't you think? I mean, we're the city on the hill.
So,
you know, a bunch of people had a great idea back around 1790, and they put together a document which at that time was a wonderful document to get, and it was designed to give power to white men who were wealthy. But at least the white men who were wealthy didn't have to listen to a single wealthy white man. They were able to organize themselves and do things. And now today you have in places like the Supreme Court originalists. Anybody who's an originalist labels themselves as a moron, because of course the situation today is so incredibly different with the acceleration from 1790 that the idea that a document designed for governance in 1790 is something you should follow without thinking about it today is absolutely insane. And we have a Supreme Court that has a series of people on it who are absolutely insane. I'm surprised they can dress in the morning, actually.
Yeah. Well, it's easy for them. It's just a road.
Well, they fought the war on women and won it. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Well,
Paul, did you ever think that you'd have to relitigate Roe versus Wade at this stage of our lives?
Jesus, it's absolutely mind-boggling, and I love Republican congressmen who announce when human life begins, as if they don't understand that sperm are fully alive. They're as are eggs. They are the haplophase of the human life cycle. And if killing eggs or sperm is murder, then I'm, when I was a teenager, a mass murderer. So
they do want to end contraception as well, because they do believe that.
Well,
they believe sperm is sacred.
After all, their main hero is a fantastic plea for both contraception and abortion.
I don't know if you heard, the state of Georgia just allowed people to get a $3,000 tax break for having an embryo inside them.
Again, if you had told me or I had told you what has happened over the last, say, 6 or 7 years, 8 years ago, each of us would have said the other is nuts. It's not possible. But I'm afraid it is not only possible, it's happening. And despite the cheery results of the election in Kansas, you still got to remember there were hundreds of thousands of people on the wrong side. And the preparations are in place to basically end what level of democracy we had. It's
looking at it also from a historical standpoint too. It's like, I mean, we focus the U.S. corporate media focuses so much on China being the aggressor, Russia being the aggressor, et cetera, but we are a collapsing empire, and there's something called the Thucydides trap, and every collapsing empire are always in the position of being the instigator and the aggressor, because the U.S., like you were saying, Murder Incorporated, they see the waning window of opportunity to try out their massacre machinery. I mean, you know, the U.S. has been pushing for a major war with China, with Russia for the last 5 years, you know, at least. And
if you look at our history, we have intervened. I mean,
yeah,
we complain bitterly about the Russians trying to intervene in our election, when of course we've run the elections in a whole series of other countries, often to the death of people we considered to be on the wrong side. But you know, if you look at the history of Russia and where Putin is, you look at the history of the United States and where not Biden so much, but whoever replaces him. After all, we're the ones who decided that terrorism, which was an attempt by relatively helpless people to bring attention to their problems, we're the ones who made it a war. You know, terrorism had been dealt with as a police and legal issue, it would have been different. But now we have the endless war, and we have the people. Of course, it is not the executives of Murder Incorporated that go out to have to look for the explosive devices and smell the smoke from the toxic fires and so on. So, and of course, you're limited what you can say in the United States in the mass media very dramatically. I was interested to see that the New York Times has slowly but surely thought it was okay to do something on population that wasn't moronic when they had an interview with Herman Daly, which is a big breakthrough for the New York Times because they've published so much stupid stuff on population. I could throw up, but for example, Noam Chomsky can't get in the New York Times or on the mass or on any of the main TV stations and so on. And he's been pointing out what the U.S. has been doing for a long time, but he's basically censored.
Yeah. It's a myth that the Times is liberal. A complete.
You know, it's liberal compared to Fox News.
Well, yeah.
And then again, so was Hitler. I mean,
My left foot is liberal compared to Fox News. Seriously.
No, if you want to give credit for deaths in the future, Rupert Murdoch probably will end up the winner. He'll kill many, many, many more people than Hitler ever managed or Stalin. And he's well at it, and he's still working hard at it.
Yeah, definitely.
He blamed the Australian forest fires that nearly killed your voice the last time I spoke to you. He blamed that on arson, not on climate change.
Again, one wonders what he does with the money. You know, how much. This is the phenomenon of more and more. It's always better to have more, no matter how much you have. So you can be a multi-billionaire and still need more, and kill off huge numbers of people in order to get it.
I have a diagnosis about that. I did a yacht delivery for an uber wealthy yacht owner up to the Pacific. And in casual conversation, he rattled off I could do a back of the envelope calculation and figured out that he was worth between 50 and $100 million. And halfway through the sail up to Tonga, I said to him, Brian, I've got a diagnosis for you. And he said, what? And I said, you've got cancer of the money.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Did he pick you up on your island?
He wouldn't hire me afterwards because he sort of had issues with my attitude. But what his wife used to do is she used to pay me on the sly. So he thought I was coming for the trip for the fun of his obnoxious pleasure. But no, his wife was paying me under the table.
I see. Well, I got to find more wives to pay me under the table. Send me an email with your secrets.
I've always loved your sense of humor, but I'd like to spend some more time with Anne now that I've heard that, because she's got to have some bloody good retorts to yours.
If she ever could get the mask off, yeah, the gag. Well, we've done 67 years, so she has a few secrets. Yeah.
I'd like to get back to something you said at the beginning about all the animals and birds on the planet. We've effectively imprisoned all of the animals on this planet for our own material gain and monetization.
Yeah. And largely to eat them.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not giving obviously I think we should be more vegetarian, but I am a carnivore, and I do eat meat. I don't think it's a good idea.
Yeah, but it's how we evolved.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's what probably is responsible for our brains, which are the source of most of our trouble.
Well, this is probably true.
You can get a lot of energy out of meat, and particularly if you cook it.
We do have energy problem, by the way. As you know, Russians cut off gas from Europe.
Yeah.
This winter is going to be suffering. And they were already accelerating nuclear power plant constructions in Europe for net zero 2050, as you know. But now they accelerate building up nuclear power more because we need energy as Russia cuts the gas off. And I remember earlier hearing you and Carl Sagan both telling that, okay, nuclear energy is a nice clean way of making energy, but do not start it if you don't know where to put the waste. And
also how to avoid massive accidents, which the trouble is, we might have done okay with nuclear power if we had waited to develop. In other words, what we did was we deployed submarine type reactors around the world, and they're much more susceptible to massive meltdown type accidents than other designs of nuclear power generation. And so we've had a series of what would you call them, extravaganzas, meltdowns, and so on, that have so scared people about nuclear power that they won't even consider what might be done with it because of the record, the miserable record.
I'm afraid my European friends and all the citizens are very excited to have nuclear power, to be independent for energy, to make clean energy and so on. But earlier we talked with dear Guy and Pauline both. Closing up a nuclear power plant safely takes around 60 years. Is that correct, Pauline? Do I remember correctly?
That's from Greg Jasko. Yes, the former Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
And we should have been closing right now what we already have in Europe. We've got already so many which create us danger of meltdown with the climate events, but we build even more.
The decommissioning and the closing could go faster if the companies that own the nuclear power plants were willing to pay for it. One of the reasons that it takes that long is because of the cost.
Yeah.
And also they don't know where to put the stuff.
Well, it's what the economists like to call an externality. And the weird thing is, if you talk to a not very bright economist, they'll say, don't worry about it. We will just internalize the externalities. Unhappily, you can't do that. So what they're always saying is, don't worry about it. We just need a miracle, and that'll take care of it.
You can solve the problem with semantics.
Yeah, you can solve the problem with semantics, exactly.
I'd like to make a point about those nuclear power stations being used, that the nuclear industry has been spruiking nuclear as an alternative to using fossil fuels for energy generation. But in the last few weeks in France, they've had to scram some of their nuclear power stations because the incoming water for cooling out of the rivers is so hot already that it's not meeting their cooling specifications, and they can't put it back out at an even higher rate. So the minute the temperature only has to go up a few degrees, and those nuclear power stations are unfucking reliable for providing service. They become as unreliable as any renewable, so-called renewable.
And the water that they release from cooling the plant, from cooling the reactor, it boils fish that go that are swimming right past the nuclear power plants. So you're not. It's not. I mean, okay, it's it doesn't create CO2 emissions while it's operating, but it's doing a lot of other things in addition to leaking radioactive waste, which they all do, regardless of what they say.
I think I sent some of you a paper that Ann and I literally just got published yesterday in print form in Bioscience on the fact that we are in the middle of an abnormal period for human history. Human history is about 300,000 years long, and virtually all of this nonsense came along in the last few hundred to a couple thousand years, depending on which one you choose. We are badly organized to survive, and we have used our brains to develop systems that just don't work and can't work. And, it would be a hell of a lot simpler if we had a population of 1 billion people, just 1 billion, 1/8 of the present population. We could maybe keep that going for thousands of years. But the situation we have now, everybody that I know that follows what's going on wonders if we can keep it going for another 3 or 4 months, let alone 1,000 years. I mean, if the election in the United States this coming fall could determine how rapidly civilization disappears very dramatically because of the power of the United States. I can't remember the exact numbers, but I believe we now spend more on our military, something like double what all the other countries of the world, including Russia, spend on it. We have this gigantic military machine that certainly has to be used somehow. I mean, why waste all that money on nuclear warheads when you could be blowing them up?
Dear Guy, I think everybody is now curious about what you're thinking. For the reduced population, would there be any chances to have habitat for less number of people for longer term?
I didn't get the question.
I'm wondering if Guy is also aligned with this idea of reducing the population. I mean, in natural ways, of course, if it's reduced, not reducing.
We want to do it humanely, and that takes time. You can, as we know from the record of countries in the Second World War, consumption. The basic problem is a product of how many people there are and what the per capita consumption is. And there are idiots like Monbiot who say, oh, it's just consumption. That's like saying that the area of a rectangle is just its width. We know that you can deal rapidly and effectively with changing consumption. As we did in the United States after December 7th, 1941. We had produced almost 4 million automobiles in 1941. The Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, and for the next 4 years, we didn't produce automobiles for civilians. We produced tanks and guns and nuclear weapons. But population, if you're going to solve it humanely, you've got to do it gradually. And there are lots of ways of doing it, but getting rid of contraception, ruining women's lives. After all, the most effective thing we know to do for sure, if you want to gradually reduce the population, is give women around the world the rights and opportunities the same or better than you give to men. And exactly the opposite is happening. The war against women isn't just fought in the United States. It is, in some respects, a global war. And we waste the talent of women, and we encourage them to have more children than they want or that they can control. So never mind. I didn't mean to give you a sermon. Amen.
Isn't it true that in first world nations like ours, one child is probably the equivalent of maybe around 30 children in a developing country?
Sure. There was a very famous paper written a few years ago by Wyatt and Nichols, who pointed out that if you're in a country like ours, having one fewer child is equivalent to persuading 25 of your friends to give up driving in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. In other words, one of the most effective things that one can do to help preserve civilization is to have 1 or 0 children. And the sooner the better.
What would you say to Elon Musk, who has 10 children?
You know, the problem with idiots reproducing, of course, is very bad for the gene pool, as in addition. We used to call them blanking idiots. Isn't he the one who sent a sports car to the moon? He's one who thinks we're going to occupy the universe. He's very short on being able to add, subtract, multiply, and divide.
I'm wondering if dear guy McPherson is agreeing with a reduced population would give some opportunity to left people to live some years more, or did we already lost all resources?
I think it's probably too late for that. And as Paul indicated, it would have to be done gradually. And things are happening very quickly now. We put more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere in the last 25 years than in all of the Industrial Revolution before that. So we're at the point that everything is going faster, and a slow response to almost anything is going to prove inadequate. Obviously, I would like there to be fewer people. There's a reason I don't have any babies of my own. You know, I was married to the youngest of 6 Catholic children from the Midwest for 33 years. And we didn't have any children because we knew that wasn't the right thing to do for Earth. You know, if she could be convinced, then I suspect almost anybody could be convinced, but only through education. And as Paul indicated, we're just not educating the people who need to be educated, which is the women, the girls and women of the world.
Well, another sad thing is that the universities are still going on as if they were in the 18th century.
Yeah.
In other words, our education system, you can go all the way through a place like Harvard or Stanford. If you take the right courses, you can learn something about the world, but they are not required. The average student coming out of either university will not necessarily know what the second law of thermodynamics tells them, what the demographic situation is, what ecosystem services are, how dependent we are on biodiversity, what's happening possibly to sperm counts, which would be good, by the way, but we're not sure what's happening, and so on. The education system produces Josh Hawleys. Josh Hawley went to Stanford. What's his name? The one from Florida, the idiot, went to Harvard.
Yeah, DeSantis.
Yeah. So the education system is broken, really broken. It doesn't cover any of the really critical issues. All the discussion in the media, take somebody I'm a fan of, Rachel Maddow, or another one, Heather Cox Richardson, who writes a wonderful column about politics in the United States, which is basically all trivial when you get right down to it. In other words, who gets elected next is nowhere near as important as can we get rid of cars. And I hate to tell you what the answer is on getting rid of cars in the near future.
There's an interesting correlation, I think, we're considering in this country. You know, if we educate more women, women will use contraception and they'll control the fertility of their families. So yes, that does happen. Now, when we lived in Belize, we discovered that I could go to a pharmacy and I could buy birth control pills without a doctor's prescription over the counter. They were $4 for a pack for a month. I could also go to the pharmacy if I missed my period and say, you know, I missed my period. I would like something to help trigger it. And they would give you McPherson, which is what we call the abortion pill here.
Yeah.
I didn't need a doctor's prescription. I could just buy that. Any woman in Belize and in Mexico can go to the pharmacy and purchase that over the counter. They're not educated. They haven't gone to college.
But they've got the word.
They know
Yeah.
how to take care of themselves. And so they trust women. In fact, they have a lower maternal and infant mortality rate in those two countries than we do in ours. And
Well, you certainly wouldn't want to give health care to people who don't have the right skin color. I mean, be serious. And you don't want to let people help other people without being members of the cult, so that you have an MD, which then restrains the number of people who can compete with you. Now, I'm not in favor of not having some controls over who gives health advice and so on, but we've gone too far.
There's the pharmacist.
Pharmacist.
Pharmacist is the one who says, yes, here's perfect something for you can have. And she didn't have to go to an expensive doctor appointment.
Well,
Whole routine
a
examination.
good rule would be don't have imbeciles on the Supreme Court. You know, if you have crooked imbeciles who are liars, throw them off. You know, we even have a device for doing that called impeachment, but we've
had a problem, but this has been a problem in the US for decades. For 50 years, women have had to rely on going to a doctor to get special care, to get contraception or to get an abortion. And there are other ways of doing that. And those are very controlled by the AMA.
Of course.
So women don't have access to that information.
There was, before abortion became legal in California, the local establishment here, university and medical, shipped women to Tijuana, where Dr. Cuinard, who was a very skilled doctor, abortionist, who would do the abortion for $500, which was a lot of money back in the pre-Roe versus Wade days. And you can see the situation again now, where people who have money can get abortions and people who don't have money can't get abortions in much of the country.
Yeah.
It's disgusting.
Absolutely.
And the Elon Musks and the Warren Buffetts of the world benefit by having all these workers.
Right.
Well,
There's that other thing too, is they need a whole bunch of people to do a bunch of menial labor so that they can continue to make billions of dollars.
well, he certainly is another plea for abortion.
I think we would call that late stage.
Yeah, late stage. Right.
I had an experience in the early 1990s. I went to Mozambique to work on a development project. The country was in collapse. It was officially the poorest country in the world. There was a war raging with the apartheid regime to the south was trying to destabilize the country. And at the time, HIV was rampaging through Africa. And I had a massive run-in with the head of the Catholic Church in Beira over him telling his people not to use condoms. We talked about Rupert Murdoch being a mass murderer, and I accused the head of the Catholic Church in Mozambique as being a mass murderer. He didn't warm to me.
I mean, things.
Funny.
Yeah. What can you say? We're imitating the wrong species. We're acting like standard chimpanzees, and we ought to be acting like bonobos, like the dwarf chimpanzees, because bonobos don't use nuclear weapons or even warfare among individuals to solve their problems. They do it with genital rubbing. And I'd like to see that take over the world. All our problems could be solved with genital rubbing.
Yeah, let's go to other species who are more clever than us, all the animal world and the plant world. Earlier with dear Guy and Pauline, we talked about planet hospice, how to leave a planet behind us. What do you think about hospice of our planet and the species. I hear some ideas about helping plants and animals to migrate. Would it be an idea to help them to survive, to find a habitat, to help some tree species, some animal species to migrate to northern or better places for them?
One of my ex-students, who's now a very distinguished scientist, Nick Haddad, has written a great deal, as have other biologists, about corridors and how to design them to help things to move. I mean, the most obvious is in places like Costa Rica, where if you can build a corridor between a sea level habitat and the hill habitat, you can save some things that are going to otherwise go under from either climate change raising the oceans, which they're doing, or the additional heating. Unfortunately, the heating keeps going so that the corridors have to go to the top of the mountains, and then the things have to migrate into the sky, which they can't do. But corridors, reserves, things like the Endangered Species Act are all useful in at least trying to delay the loss of biodiversity. But anybody who thinks you can save biodiversity and let the human enterprise continue to grow is smoking the wrong stuff. It's just not going to happen. It's good to have all those things, but for instance, I now absolutely refuse to endorse anything that just says we should build a corridor here or we should do this or that if they don't put in. But unless you stop the growth of the human population and the growth of consumption, you're going to be wasting your money. They're all good things. They should be done because we need delay. If we have any chance at all of saving anything, we've got to slow down, and those things help us to slow down. But if you're just slowing down, but you're not going to stop before you go off the cliff, forget it.
Yeah, Robert Allen Bartlett said the greatest tragedy of the human species is its inability to comprehend the exponential function. And, you know, what I find so tragic, I know Beryl and I discussed your book recently, and it's interesting you brought up, you know, the ecofeminist. You know, you see this so much in the developing world. I think of the courageous work of Wangari Maathai, you know, the Africa Greenbelt movement. Yeah. I think of the work of Vandana Shiva, and even like in Central America, Rigoberta Menchú. You know, and what's so tragic is that, you know, they have been following that approach of, you know, empowering women in their microeconomies to do things like plant trees and everything that you would think would really, you know, empower and change the game. But they're all being washed away by the exponential, abrupt climate change shock. That's just, you know,
if the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic demonstrated anything politically that was dramatic, was what you just said, that educated people in the United States have no clue about exponential growth. They don't understand that a long history of exponential growth in no way implies a long future of exponential growth. They don't get it. And it's the sort of thing that should be taught in middle school, not even high school. And yet I would wager that 90% of the students and faculty at any major university could not explain exponential growth to you any more than they could explain the second law. And we're a supposedly educated country where most people don't have a clue what's going on.
Yeah, Guy McPherson has a great video. I've seen the dominoes, you know, the next.
Yeah.
Dear Guy, as a conservation scientist, do you have more to add? Can we help other species by helping them to migrate? For instance, would there be some chances? How do you see it?
I think because the rate of environmental change is proceeding so quickly at this point, that unless we combine that with a few thousand other tactics, it won't work. Certainly not by itself. We need to have, first of all, we need to start reflecting some of the incoming sunlight back into space. We're the warmest planet ever as of 2017, according to a paper by James Henson colleague. we're the warmest planet ever with any version of civilization present. That was 5 years ago. I promise we have not gotten any cooler since then. So we need to do a lot of things, and we need to do them last month. We need to do them immediately. The mere reflection framework is something I've talked about, and I suspect it's too late even for that.
Dear Paul Ehrlich, are you aware of the mere reflection project, the mirror system to cool down the planet, to reflect some sunlight back? Do you think that would help the species to find some habitat?
If you could cool down keep the planet from warming a lot more, that would certainly be helpful. But I don't see any way. I shouldn't say but my colleagues who know this stuff inside and out are not great fans of geoengineering of any kind, for both biophysical and political reasons. That is, if the US starts to launch some kind of solution, say, to try and screen out some of the solar radiation, and that leads to droughts in China, the Chinese won't like it and they might do something about it. So it's not so much what we should be doing, it's what we should stop doing. For instance, when you talk about helping organisms move, one of the biggest problems for biodiversity is the transport by people of exotic animals and plants into places where they don't belong. Some of it's kind of interesting. There's now a catfish is spreading from Eastern Europe to Western Europe and wiping out the fish, the normal fish that are important to the human enterprise. The catfish, it's called the Wells, W-E-L-S catfish. You can Google it. It gets up to something like 10 feet long, and they come out of the water and grab birds.
Oh
They can dine on pigeons. There are wonderful pictures of them dining on pigeons. They come out, grab the pigeon, and flop back into the water. We're moving stuff like that around. And
that's not a bad use of pigeons, by the way.
Wow.
yeah, right, exactly. Good pigeon control method. Unfortunately, they eat the salmon and shad and so on that people like to eat themselves.
One of the things I'd like to talk about when I hear people talking about relocating species north is I hear a lot of people talking about, as the Arctic's melting and it's regreening and it can be reforested, but there's no mollusils up in those areas. You can't take trees from one ecosystem and expect them to be able to thrive in a completely different ecosystem.
Well, the soils will eventually evolve. So maybe we'll just have a 3 or 4 million year gap when we can't feed people. But I mean, always get this that don't worry about the corn in Iowa. It'll move up into Canada, and they don't know about the Canadian shield. It is sort of like the moron you mentioned, who I can't remember, who wants to populate the entire solar system with people, farm Mars. Yeah, the people who talk about moving to Mars don't realize that one doubling of the population on Earth shipped to Mars would make Mars more heavily populated than Earth by far, because it's smaller. The fact that it can't support people, of course, is a minor consideration to idiots.
Well, people cannot stay in a camping place more than 3 days because they need to reach the supermarket. How can they stay in Mars? I'm really curious.
Indeed.
Yeah, I always wished you were right when you said 1970 population will suddenly decrease because of the food crisis. But then they said, ta-da, we've got modern agriculture, suddenly we've got more food. Paul Ehrlich, you were wrong. You didn't predict well. I wish you predicted well that time.
Well, first of all, what makes you think that was
end up like this, right?
What makes you think that was wrong? You don't see the statistics on how many kids have died since
with
then.
A delay with worse impact. I mean, it didn't. Population didn't fall down in 1970. Obviously,
that's true. And I'm glad it didn't.
But now we take all the other species with us. It's not only human population, it's all the other species are going right now.
That's right.
I wish you were right that time. In 1970, if the population fell down, we didn't make such impact on other species population.
You are correct.
Now we are taking everything else with us.
Yeah. People don't think about that, unfortunately. Interestingly, one of the things you almost never hear discussed in the mass media is ethics. What is ethical to do? In my view, most of the things we're doing are unethical.
What is ethical for environment? How we should live in the rest of our time?
Yeah. Well, what we should do is what people did for most of human history. Again, human history is 300,000 years old, and we became successful by being cooperative and empathetic and relating to the people because we had small groups. And we still have that built into us because, for instance, most of us watch soap operas. The reason we watch soap operas is we're empathetic. We can relate to the people in them. Or if you're reading a good novel and the hero dies at the end, you feel sad. You're built in to relate to other people, but it's very hard to relate to 7.9 billion other people. We're a small group animal that's struggling to learn to live in gigantic groups, and we're doing a lousy job of it.
Yeah, we don't have hive mind intelligence, and we don't have cephalopod intelligence, as someone like.
Any comments or questions to dear Paul Ehrlich from others, dear Guy, Pauline, Kevin?
Other than that, this is fine. And I don't know if you've seen the cartoon that has the dog, obviously, in hell. And his thought bubble says, this is fine.
Well, I've got to go.
Thank you so much for this conversation.
No, it was my pleasure to get together with, among others, several old friends here. People ask me why you keep talking, blabbing, and fighting and writing papers on this stuff. And I now say it's habit. So I don't know what else to do. So it's been a pleasure.
It's a great pleasure.